Katherine Miller flinched as her mother-in-law's words sliced through the air like a whip. 5 years of marriage and not a single son to show for it. You're as barren as the desert, girl. The farmhouse kitchen, once a place of comfort, had become Katherine's daily battleground in the small town of Redemption Creek, Colorado. 1878. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Katherine's calloused hands trembled slightly as she continued kneading the bread dough, refusing to give Mildred Miller the satisfaction of seeing her tears. "Harold deserves better," Mildred continued, her voice carrying the weight of disappointment that had become all too familiar. "A man needs sons to carry on his name, to work his land. What good is a wife who can't provide that?" Katherine pressed her fingers into the dough harder than necessary, imagining it was Mildred's face. 5 years of trying. 5 years of monthly disappointments. 5 years of watching her husband's hopeful expression fade each time she shook her head no. "I've done everything I can," Katherine whispered, more to herself than to Mildred. "Well, it hasn't been enough, has it?" Mildred snapped, adjusting her shawl around her bony shoulders. "My Harold deserves sons. His father had 3 brothers. The Miller men have always been fertile. The problem lies with you." The front door creaked open before Katherine could respond, and Harold's heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. At 32, Harold Miller still possessed the robust build of his younger years, though the lines around his eyes had deepened with each passing season of drought and disappointment. "Ma, what are you doing here so early?" Harold asked, hanging his hat on the hook by the door. "Someone needs to speak sense into this household," Mildred replied, her chin lifting with defiance. "I was just telling Katherine that it's time you considered your options." Harold's eyes darted to Katherine, then back to his mother. What options would those be? Annulment. Or divorce if necessary. The widow Jenkins has a daughter of marriageable age. Fertile stock, that family. 6 children her mother had. Katherine's hands stilled in the dough. Though they had discussed it in hushed voices late at night, hearing it stated so baldly made her stomach turn. "Ma, that's enough," Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. Katherine knew then what she had feared for months. Harold agreed with his mother. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "I'll finish the bread later," Katherine murmured, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. She needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating presence of her mother-in-law and the silent betrayal of her husband. Outside, the Colorado spring was in full bloom, a cruel contrast to the barrenness she felt within. Katherine leaned against the rough wood of the barn, finally allowing her tears to fall. The chickens clucked indifferently around her feet, their simple lives of laying eggs and scratching dirt suddenly enviable. That evening, Katherine sat across from Harold at their small kitchen table. The beef stew she'd prepared sat cooling between them, untouched. Mildred had finally left, but her poisonous words remained, hovering in the air like a noxious cloud. "You agree with her," Katherine said flatly. "It wasn't a question," Harold sighed, pushing his bowl away. "Katie, you know I love you, but you want sons." "Every man wants sons," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, to carry on his name, to work alongside him. "And I've failed to give you that." Katherine's voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. Harold reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough from years of working the land. "We could try again. Dr. Ferguson mentioned there are treatments. We've tried everything," Katherine interrupted. "Every remedy, every position, every prayer." "If it hasn't happened by now, Harold, it won't happen." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and disappointments. "Pastor Williams says that sometimes God's plan isn't what we expect," Harold finally said. Maybe we could adopt. Your mother would never accept a child not of Miller blood, Katherine replied. And deep down, neither would you. Harold didn't deny it. His silence was confirmation enough. What do you want to do? Katherine asked, though she already knew the answer. Harold's eyes, once full of love and promise, now couldn't meet hers. I think, maybe it's best if we consider what Ma suggested. The words hung in the air, finalizing what Katherine had known was coming. Her marriage was over. I see, she whispered. Then I'll save you the trouble of the paperwork. She stood, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. I'll be gone by morning. Katie, Harold started, but Katherine raised her hand to stop him. Don't make this harder than it already is, Harold. We both know this is what you want. What your mother wants. She removed her wedding ring, placing it gently on the table. The gold band caught the lamplight, glinting accusingly. I hope she finds you a wife who can give you a house full of sons. That night, as Harold slept, Katherine packed her meager belongings. Clothes, a few books, her mother's silver hairbrush. She left behind the wedding quilt, the china they'd received as gifts, the life she'd thought would be hers forever. In the pre-dawn darkness, she scrawled a note of farewell, then quietly slipped out the door with nothing but a carpet bag and the small amount of money she'd saved from selling her embroidery work at the general store. The stagecoach didn't run until noon, so Katherine walked, her boots raising small clouds of dust on the road leading away from Redemption Creek. The town was still sleeping as she passed through, past the church where she'd made her vows, past the general store where the shopkeeper's wife had recently given birth to her fourth son, past the schoolhouse where she'd once imagined her own children would learn their letters. By mid-morning, Katherine had reached the crossroads where the stagecoach would stop. She sat on her carpetbag, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, and wondered where she would go. She had a cousin in Denver, though they hadn't spoken in years. Perhaps she could find work as a seamstress or a laundress. Women alone had few options in the West, but Katherine was determined to make her way. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her from her thoughts. A rider was approaching from the west, the direction of Twin Pines, the next town over. Katherine squinted against the sun, making out the silhouette of a man on horseback. As he drew closer, she could see he was a stranger, tall and lean in the saddle, with broad shoulders and a dusty brown hat pulled low over his eyes. A rifle was secured to his saddle, and a bandana was tied around his neck, typical of the cowboys who worked the ranches in the area. The rider slowed as he approached, and Katherine tensed. A woman alone was vulnerable, especially on a deserted road. "Mornin', madam," he called, tipping his hat. Waiting for the stage, Katherine nodded, her hand instinctively tightening around the handle of her carpetbag. The rider seemed to sense her wariness and kept his distance. "Headed to Twin Pines myself. Mind if I wait with you? These roads can be dangerous for folks traveling alone." There was something in his voice, a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance that made Katherine relax slightly. "I suppose that would be all right." The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. He led his horse, a handsome buckskin gelding, to a patch of grass nearby and let the animal graze. Then, keeping a respectful distance, he sat on a fallen log across from Katherine. "Name's Clayton Reed," he said, extending a hand. "Most folks call me Clay." Katherine hesitated before taking his hand. "Katherine Miller," she paused, "though I suppose it's just Katherine now." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because Clay's expression softened with understanding. "Running from something or toward something, Miss Katherine?" "Both, perhaps," she admitted, surprising herself with her candor. "And it's Mrs. Still, technically." Clay nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, Sometimes the road between from and toward is the most important part of the journey. Katherine studied him more carefully now. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his mid-30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. His face was tanned and weathered, but handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath a short beard that was the same dark brown as his hair. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a clear, striking blue that seemed to see right through her. "You're not from around here," she observed. Clay smiled, and the simple action transformed his face, making him appear younger. "No, madam. Originally from Texas. Been working my way north for the past few years, taking ranch work where I can find it." "And what brings you to this part of Colorado?" Heard the double R was looking for experienced hands, he replied. "Owners getting on in years, looking for someone who knows cattle." Katherine had heard of the Double R Ranch. It was one of the largest in the county, owned by Russell Reynolds, a widower who'd built his empire from nothing. The ranch was about 20 miles outside of Twin Pines. "I hear Mr. Reynolds is particular about who he hires," Katherine said. Clay shrugged. "I've been breaking horses and herding cattle since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Figure I've got as good a chance as any." The conversation lulled into a comfortable silence. Katherine found herself relaxing in Clay's presence, despite her usual caution around strangers, especially men. There was something reassuring about him, a quiet strength that didn't demand attention. The distant rumble of wheels and the jingle of harnesses announced the approach of the stagecoach before it came into view. Katherine stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. Clay rose as well, moving to secure his horse. "Where are you headed?" he asked as the stagecoach drew closer. "Denver, I think," Katherine replied, though with less certainty than she would have liked. "I have family there, or at least I did once." Clay nodded, studying her face. "Denver's a big place for a woman alone." "I don't have much choice," Katherine said, lifting her chin, "and I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." A smile played at the corners of Clay's mouth. "I don't doubt that for a second, Mrs. Miller." The stagecoach pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The driver, a weather-beaten man with a grizzled beard, called down, "Twin Pines and points east. All aboard who's coming aboard." Clay stepped forward. "2 for Twin Pines," he said, reaching into his pocket and extracting coins for the fare. "I can pay my own way," Katherine protested. Clay shook his head. "Consider it a kindness from one traveler to another. You can buy me a coffee when we reach Twin Pines if you've a mind to." Before Katherine could argue further, Clay had handed the money to the driver and was helping the stagecoach attendant secure his horse to the back of the coach. "Come on, lady. We ain't got all day," the driver called impatiently. Clay returned to Katherine's side, taking her carpet bag and offering his hand to help her into the coach. "Shall we?" For a moment, Katherine hesitated. This man was a stranger, and she was at a crossroads in every sense of the word. But something in his steady gaze and quiet confidence made her decision easier. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to assist her into the stagecoach. Inside, they were the only passengers. Katherine settled on the bench, arranging her skirts and placing her carpetbag beside her. Clay sat opposite, removing his hat and placing it on his knee, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. With a shout from the driver and the crack of a whip, the stagecoach lurched forward, carrying Katherine away from the life she'd known and toward an uncertain future. "So, Mrs. Miller," Clay said as the coach settled into a steady rhythm, "what awaits you in Denver besides distant family?" Katherine looked out the window at the passing landscape. "A fresh start, I hope. And please call me Katherine." Clay nodded. "A fresh start is a precious thing, Katherine. Not everyone is brave enough to seek one." It wasn't bravery that drove me from my home, Katherine admitted. It was necessity. Sometimes those are one and the same, Clay replied. The stagecoach hit a rut in the road, jolting them both. Clay reached out instinctively to steady Katherine, his hand briefly touching her arm before withdrawing. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's fine," Katherine said, though she felt a strange flutter at the brief contact. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with genuine concern. They fell into conversation as the miles passed beneath the wheels of the coach. Clay told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, losing his parents to fever when he was 16, and spending the years since working his way through the territories. Katherine found herself sharing more than she'd intended: her marriage to Harold, the growing pressure to produce sons, and finally, her departure. "So your husband cast you aside because you couldn't give him sons?" Clay asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Katherine looked down at her hands, noticing the pale band of skin where her wedding ring had been. "He would say I left of my own accord, but yes, that's the heart of it." "That's a mighty poor reason to throw away a marriage," Clay said, shaking his head. "A good woman is worth more than a dozen sons in my reckoning." Katherine glanced up, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "That's not a common view, especially out here where every farm and ranch needs hands to work it." "Maybe not," Clay agreed. "But I've known plenty of men with sons who grew up to be nothing but trouble. And I've known women who could outwork, outthink, and outride most men I've met." For the first time in months, Katherine felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. "You're an unusual man, Mr. Reed." "Clay," he corrected with a smile of his own. "And I'll take that as a compliment." By the time the stagecoach rolled into Twin Pines in the late afternoon, Katherine felt as if she'd known Clay Reed for years rather than hours. The easy conversation had been a welcome distraction from the heartache and uncertainty that had been her constant companions. Twin Pines was larger than Redemption Creek, boasting a proper hotel, 2 saloons, a bank, and various shops lining its main street. The stagecoach stopped in front of the hotel, and Clay descended first, turning to offer Katherine his hand. As her feet touched the dusty street, the reality of her situation came rushing back. She was alone, with limited funds and no clear plan beyond reaching Denver. "Thank you for your company," she said, reaching for her carpet bag, "and for the fare." Clay handed her the bag, his expression thoughtful. "You mentioned that coffee," he said. "I could use one after that ride, and we could discuss your plans if you'd like." Katherine hesitated. While she'd enjoyed Clay's company on the journey, extending their acquaintance seemed unwise. Yet the prospect of facing her uncertain future alone was daunting. "Just coffee," Clay added, seeming to sense her reluctance. "The hotel has a decent restaurant, I hear. Public place, proper as can be." Katherine nodded, making her decision. "All right, coffee it is." The hotel restaurant was quiet at this hour, with only a few tables occupied. A middle-aged waitress with a kind face showed them to a table near the window. Katherine ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie, suddenly realizing she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. "So, Denver," Clay said once they were settled. "You mentioned a cousin." Katherine nodded, adding a spoonful of sugar to her coffee. "Margaret Thornton. Though I haven't seen her since she married and moved to Denver 8 years ago. I'm not even certain she still lives there." Clay frowned. "That's not much of a plan." "I'm aware," Katherine replied, a touch of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "But it's the only one I have at the moment." Clay raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I didn't mean any offense, it's just—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Denver's a big city. Lot of opportunities, but also a lot of dangers for a woman on her own." Katherine cut a piece of pie with her fork, avoiding his gaze. "I don't have many options, Mr. Reed. I can't go back to Redemption Creek. I have no family elsewhere, and my skills are limited to cooking, sewing, and keeping house, hardly unique qualifications. What about staying in Twin Pines for a while? Clay suggested. It's a growing town. Might be opportunities here that would suit you better than Denver. Katherine looked up, studying his face. And why would you care what happens to me? We only met a few hours ago. Clay's blue eyes held her steadily. I've been on my own a long time, Katherine. I know how hard it can be. And I believe in helping folks when I can. He took a sip of his coffee. Besides, I find I enjoy your company. A warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee spread through Katherine's chest. It had been a long time since anyone had expressed genuine concern for her welfare, or simply enjoyed her presence. I appreciate the thought, she said carefully, but I don't see what Twin Pines could offer that Denver couldn't, and at least in Denver I might have family. Clay nodded, accepting her decision. Fair enough. When does the Denver stage leave? Day after tomorrow, according to the schedule. Well then, Clay said, that gives you a day to rest and perhaps reconsider, or at least prepare better for your journey. Katherine couldn't argue with his logic. A day of rest would do her good, and she could use the time to plan more carefully. As they finished their coffee, Clay mentioned that he would be riding out to the Double R Ranch the next morning to speak with Mr. Reynolds about employment. If you've no objections, he said, I'd like to check on you before I leave town, make sure you're settled all right. Katherine found herself nodding. That would be kind of you. They parted ways outside the hotel, Clay heading to the livery to see to his horse and Katherine securing a room for the night. The hotel clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, gave her a curious look as she signed the register as Miss Katherine Miller, but asked no questions. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Katherine set her carpetbag on the bed and sat beside it, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. Tears came then, silent and hot, streaming down her face as she confronted the reality of her situation. Her marriage was over. Her life in Redemption Creek was behind her. At 26, she was starting over with nothing but a carpetbag of belongings and the crushing knowledge that she had failed at the one thing society deemed most important for a woman. Yet as she wiped away her tears and began unpacking her few possessions, Katherine felt something else stirring beneath the grief and uncertainty, a tentative sense of possibility. For 5 years, her worth had been measured by her ability to produce sons. Now, for better or worse, she was free of that expectation. And then there was Clay Reed, a stranger who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than Harold had in the final months of their marriage. His suggestion that she stay in Twin Pines lingered in her mind, though she wasn't ready to admit it. As darkness fell over the town, Katherine changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the covers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for a long time. When it finally came, she dreamed of blue eyes and open roads, of possibilities she had never dared to consider before. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of Katherine's hotel room. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, she reached for Harold beside her. The empty space brought reality crashing back, and she sat up, taking a deep breath to steady herself. After washing and dressing, Katherine made her way downstairs to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. The room was busier than it had been the previous evening, filled with travelers and local businessmen starting their day. She found a small table in the corner and ordered coffee and eggs. As she waited for her meal, Katherine observed the bustling life of Twin Pines through the window. The town was awake and active, with wagons rolling down the main street, shopkeepers opening their doors and people going about their business. It was larger and more vibrant than Redemption Creek, with a sense of growth and opportunity that her former home had lacked. Her breakfast arrived, and Katherine was halfway through her eggs when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Clay Reed looked even more imposing in the daylight, his tall frame filling the entrance before he spotted her and crossed the room to her table. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding on your breakfast." Katherine gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Not at all. Please join me." Clay settled into the chair, ordering coffee when the waitress approached. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, though his shirt was fresher and his face newly shaved, revealing a strong jawline that had been partially hidden beneath his beard. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his blue eyes studying her face with a concern that made Katherine self-conscious of the shadows she knew must be visible beneath her eyes. "Well enough," she lied. "And you?" "Like a log," Clay replied with a smile. "Always do when I'm not sleeping on the ground or in a bunkhouse." The waitress brought his coffee, and Clay thanked her before turning his attention back to Katherine. "So, have you given any more thought to your plans?" Katherine set down her fork. "I have, actually. I still intend to go to Denver, but you were right about needing to be better prepared. I thought I might visit the telegraph office today and send a message to my cousin, see if she's still in Denver and willing to receive me." Clay nodded approvingly. "That's sensible. And if she's not there, then I'll need a more concrete plan before I leave," Katherine admitted. "Perhaps inquire about employment opportunities in Denver." "And Twin Pines?" Clay asked, his voice casual but his eyes intent. "Have you considered what might be available here?" Katherine sighed. "Mr. Reed Clay, I appreciate your concern, truly. But why are you so invested in my staying in Twin Pines? We barely know each other." Clay's fingers tapped thoughtfully against his coffee cup. "I suppose that's fair enough. Truth is, I can't rightly say why myself, except that I've learned to trust my instincts over the years. And my instincts tell me you'd be better off here than in Denver, at least for now." Katherine studied him, trying to discern his motives. There was no guile in his expression, only genuine concern and something else she couldn't quite identify. "I'll consider it," she finally said. "But I need to send that telegraph first." Clay seemed satisfied with that answer. "I'm heading out to the Double R after breakfast. Should be back by evening. If you're still here, maybe we could have dinner and you can tell me what you decided." The invitation was casual, but Katherine felt a flutter of something like anticipation. That would be nice. They finished their breakfast, talking of inconsequential things: the weather, the town, Clay's hopes for employment at the Double R. When they parted outside the hotel, Clay tipped his hat to her. "Until this evening, then," he said. Katherine watched him walk away, his confident stride carrying him down the street toward the livery. Only when he disappeared from view did she turn toward the telegraph office, her mind already composing the message she would send to her cousin. The telegraph operator, a young man with ink-stained fingers, took her message with professional efficiency. "Should have a reply by this afternoon if your cousin's in Denver," he told her. "You can check back around 4 o'clock. With hours to fill, Katherine decided to explore Twin Pines. The town was indeed growing, with new buildings under construction at the edges of the main street. She visited the general store, browsing the shelves and noting prices. They were similar to those in Redemption Creek, though the selection was better. The shopkeeper's wife, a plump woman with a friendly smile, struck up a conversation when Katherine purchased a small bar of lavender soap. "You're new in town," the woman observed. "Just passing through, possibly," Katherine replied. "I haven't quite decided yet." "Well, if you're looking to stay, Twin Pines is a fine place for it," the woman said. Growing every day we are. My husband can barely keep the shelves stocked. There's such demand. Are there many opportunities for women here? Katherine asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. The shopkeeper's wife considered this. Well, now depends on what you can do. We've got the hotel and restaurants that need help. The dressmaker's always looking for skilled hands. And there's talk of opening a proper school come fall. They'll need a teacher for that. Katherine's interest sharpened. A school? I've had some experience teaching. In my former town, I sometimes substituted when the schoolmaster was ill. Is that so? The woman smiled. You should speak with Mayor Wilkins. He's heading the committee for the school. His office is just down the street next to the bank. Katherine thanked her for the information and continued her exploration of the town. She passed the mayor's office but didn't go in, not yet ready to commit to the idea of staying. Instead, she found herself drawn to a small building at the edge of town with a freshly painted sign declaring it the Twin Pines Gazette. Inside, a man with spectacles was bent over a printing press. He looked up as the bell above the door announced Katherine's entrance. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, wiping ink from his hands with a rag. "I was just curious about your newspaper," Katherine said. "We had nothing like this in my hometown." The man, Elias Donovan, as he introduced himself, was the owner, editor, and primary writer for the Gazette. He was clearly proud of his small operation and eager to talk about it. "Started it 2 years ago," he told Katherine. "Twin Pines was growing, needed a proper paper. We publish weekly now, but I'm hoping to move to twice weekly by year's end." Katherine found herself asking questions about the newspaper business, genuinely interested in the process. Her father had been an avid reader, instilling in her a love of the written word that had survived despite Harold's indifference to books. "You seem quite knowledgeable about literature," Donovan observed after Katherine mentioned a recent article she'd read in a Denver paper. "I enjoy reading," Katherine admitted, "and writing, though I've had little opportunity for it." Donovan's eyes lit up. "Can you type?" "I've been saving for one of those new typewriting machines. Should arrive next month." "I've never used one," Katherine said, "but I learn quickly." Donovan studied her thoughtfully. "I could use someone to help with correspondence, perhaps some editing." "Nothing full-time yet, but if the paper continues to grow." The conversation left Katherine with much to consider as she made her way back to the hotel for lunch. By 4 o'clock, she was at the telegraph office, heart pounding as the operator handed her a reply from Denver. The message was brief and crushing. "No Margaret Thornton at this address. Moved 2 years ago. Forwarding address unknown." Katherine's last tenuous connection to Denver, to any kind of plan, had vanished. She thanked the operator and stepped outside, the paper clutched in her hand, suddenly feeling adrift. Without conscious decision, her feet carried her to the mayor's office. Mayor Wilkins was a portly man with a bushy mustache and an air of self-importance that reminded Katherine uncomfortably of Mildred Miller. But he listened attentively as she inquired about the teaching position. "We're still gathering funds," he explained. "But we hope to open the school by September. You say you have experience." "Some," Katherine acknowledged. "I completed schooling in Denver before my marriage and occasionally substituted in my former town." "Any references?" Katherine hesitated. "I would have to write to Redemption Creek." "The schoolmaster there could vouch for me." Mayor Wilkins nodded, making a note. "Do that, Mrs. Miller," Katherine supplied. "Katherine Miller." "Very well, Mrs. Miller. Get those references to me and we'll consider you when the time comes. Can't promise anything, of course. Depends on the funds and if we find someone with more experience." It wasn't much, but it was something. As Katherine left the mayor's office, she found herself considering Twin Pines with new eyes. She visited the dressmaker next, introducing herself and inquiring about work. The elderly woman who owned the shop was more encouraging than the mayor, examining Catherine's stitching on her own dress and nodding approvingly. "Could use help with alterations," she said. "Nothing steady at first, but if your work is good, could become regular." By the time Catherine returned to the hotel, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the main street. She had options now, tentative though they were. Between the potential teaching position, occasional work at the dressmakers, and the possibility of helping at the Gazette, she might be able to support herself in Twin Pines, at least temporarily. Catherine was in the hotel lobby, considering these possibilities, when Clay Reed walked through the front door. He spotted her immediately, his face breaking into a smile that transformed his weathered features. "You're still here," he said, crossing to her side. "I am," Catherine replied, finding herself returning his smile. "How was your visit to the Double R?" "Promising," Clay said. "Mr. Reynolds offered me a position on the spot, said he needed someone with experience to help manage the place. His foreman retired last month and he's been struggling since." "That's wonderful news," Catherine said sincerely. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Clay glanced around the lobby, then back to Catherine. "I believe I mentioned dinner. If you're amenable, I'd like to hear about your day." They dined at a small restaurant across from the hotel, a cozy establishment with checkered tablecloths and surprisingly good food. Clay listened attentively as Catherine recounted her explorations of Twin Pines and the potential opportunities she'd discovered. "So your cousin wasn't in Denver," he said when she'd finished. Catherine shook her head. "No, apparently she moved 2 years ago, no forwarding address." "I'm sorry," Clay said, and she could tell he meant it, "but it sounds like you found some promising possibilities here." "Perhaps," Catherine agreed, though nothing certain. Clay hesitated, seeming to debate with himself before speaking. "I might have another option for you to consider." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the Double R," Clay said. "Mr. Reynolds mentioned he's looking for someone to help run the household. His wife passed some years back, and the place has been neglected. He's got a cook, but no one to manage the house proper. It would be a respectable position with room and board included." Catherine set down her fork, surprised by the suggestion. "You want me to become a housekeeper? It's honest work," Clay said. "And it would give you time to consider your other options while having a roof over your head and food on your table. The ranch is beautiful, Catherine. 20 miles out of town, with views of the mountains that would take your breath away." The idea was tempting. Catherine had always enjoyed keeping a well-ordered home, and the prospect of room and board meant she could save what little money she had. "Would Mr. Reynolds hire someone he's never met, on your recommendation alone?" she asked skeptically. Clay smiled. "He seemed willing to consider it. I told him about meeting a respectable widow who might be interested in the position. He asked me to extend the invitation for you to visit the ranch tomorrow, if you're interested." Catherine considered the offer. It wasn't what she had imagined for herself when she left Redemption Creek, but then again, nothing had turned out as expected. And there was something appealing about the idea of being away from town, having space and time to heal. "I'll think about it," she promised. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, Clay telling her about the Double R and his new position there. As they walked back to the hotel, the night air cool and fragrant with pine, Catherine found herself relaxing in his company in a way she hadn't with anyone in a very long time. At the hotel entrance, Clay paused. "If you decide you'd like to see the ranch, I'll be leaving at 8 tomorrow morning." "No pressure, of course, but the offer stands." Catherine looked up at him, studying his face in the lamplight, There was kindness there and something else, a hope that she found both flattering and slightly intimidating. "Thank you, Clay," she said softly, "for everything." He tipped his hat, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Katherine." As she watched him walk away, Katherine knew her decision was already made. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Katherine rose early, packed her carpetbag, and settled her bill at the hotel. By 8 o'clock, she was waiting outside the livery stable, where Clay had arranged to meet her. He arrived promptly, leading his buckskin gelding and a second horse, a gentle-looking bay mare. His face lit up when he saw her, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You decided to come," he said, and there was no mistaking the pleasure in his voice. "I thought I should at least see the place before making a decision," Katherine replied, trying to sound practical despite the flutter of excitement in her stomach. Clay helped her mount the mare, his hands strong and steady as he adjusted the stirrups for her. Katherine had ridden before most women in the West, had at least basic riding skills, but it had been some time, and she was grateful for his assistance. The journey to the Double R Ranch took most of the morning. They rode at a leisurely pace, the horses picking their way along the well-traveled road that eventually gave way to a less defined trail. Clay pointed out landmarks as they went: a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran year-round, a stand of aspen trees that would turn golden in the fall. "How long have you been in Colorado?" Katherine asked as they paused to rest the horses at a small stream. Clay handed her a canteen of water. "About 6 months. Came up from New Mexico last fall. Worked a few small spreads near Colorado Springs before hearing about the Double R." "You move around a lot," Katherine observed, taking a sip of water. Clay nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains. "Never found a reason to stay in one place too long. Until now, maybe." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that Katherine wasn't ready to examine too closely. She returned the canteen and remounted her horse, ready to continue their journey. They crested a hill around midday, and Clay reined in his horse, gesturing for Katherine to do the same. Below them, spread across a verdant valley, was the Double R Ranch. It was larger than Katherine had imagined, with a substantial main house, a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the snow-capped mountains provided a magnificent backdrop. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed. Clay nodded, a touch of pride in his voice, though he'd only just begun working there. "Reynolds built it from nothing. Started with 100 acres and a dream 30 years ago. Now, it's one of the largest spreads in the county." They rode down into the valley, following a well-maintained road that led to the main house. It was an impressive 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. As they approached, a man emerged from the house, shading his eyes against the midday sun. Russell Reynolds was older than Katherine had expected, perhaps in his mid-60s, with a shock of white hair and a face weathered by decades in the Colorado sun and wind. But his eyes were sharp and clear as he watched them approach, and his back was still straight despite his years. "Mr. Reynolds," Clay called as they dismounted, "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Katherine Miller." Reynolds stepped forward, extending a hand to Katherine. His grip was firm, his appraisal direct but not unkind. "Mrs. Miller, Reed here speaks highly of you. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reynolds," Katherine replied. "You have a beautiful ranch." Reynolds nodded, accepting the compliment as his due. "Built it myself with these 2 hands and a lot of sweat. Come inside. You must be tired after the ride." The interior of the house revealed both its potential and its current neglect. The rooms were spacious and well-designed, with large windows that let in ample light. but dust had accumulated on the surfaces. The curtains needed washing, and there was a general air of disarray that spoke of a home without a woman's touch for some time. Reynolds led them to a sitting room where a Hispanic woman was setting out coffee and sandwiches on a side table. "This is Maria," Reynolds said. "Best cook in 3 counties. Been with me 15 years. Maria nodded politely to Katherine before leaving the room. Reynolds gestured for them to sit and help themselves to the refreshments. "So, Reed tells me you're looking for a position," Reynolds said, getting straight to the point. Katherine took a sip of coffee to gather her thoughts. "I'm considering my options, yes. Clay mentioned you might be in need of someone to manage your household." Reynolds looked around the room, a flicker of something like embarrassment crossing his face. "Place has gone to seed since my Alina passed. Been 5 years now. Maria does what she can, but she's got the cooking to manage and the ranch hands to feed." "I understand," Katherine said. "It's difficult to maintain a home of this size without dedicated attention." Reynolds studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Reed says you're recently widowed." Katherine hesitated, not wanting to lie but reluctant to explain the complexities of her situation. "My marriage has ended," she said carefully. "I'm looking for a fresh start." If Reynolds found this answer unusual, he didn't show it. The position would include room and board, plus a monthly wage. You'd have your own quarters. There's a small suite of rooms on the 2nd floor that would suit a lady. Your duties would involve overseeing the cleaning and maintenance of the house, managing linens, occasionally helping Maria with meal planning, and generally ensuring the place runs smoothly. It was a straightforward offer, and Katherine found herself considering it seriously. The ranch was indeed beautiful, the position respectable, and the distance from town would give her the privacy she needed to heal from her failed marriage. "I'd like to see the rest of the house," she said. "If that's acceptable." Reynolds nodded, setting down his cup. "Of course." The tour confirmed Katherine's initial impressions. The house was fundamentally sound but badly in need of attention. The bedrooms were dusty, the kitchen organized according to Maria's preferences, but not as efficiently as it could be, and the dining room looked as though it hadn't been used for a formal meal in years. The suite Reynolds offered her was at the end of the upstairs hallway, consisting of a bedroom, a small sitting room, and a private washroom, a luxury Katherine hadn't expected. The rooms were simply furnished but comfortable, with windows overlooking the mountains. "I could be happy here," Katherine thought, surprising herself with the realization. When they returned downstairs, Reynolds excused himself to attend to ranch business, leaving Katherine and Clay alone in the sitting room. "What do you think?" Clay asked, his expression hopeful. Katherine moved to the window, looking out at the ranch spread before her. "It's a good offer," she admitted. "The house needs work, but nothing that can't be managed with time and effort." "And Reynolds is a fair man," Clay added. "Rough around the edges, perhaps, but honest and decent." Katherine turned to face him. "Why are you doing this, Clay? You barely know me." Clay took a step closer, his blue eyes serious. "I told you, I trust my instincts, and my instincts tell me you're someone worth knowing, Katherine Miller. Someone who deserves a chance at happiness after what you've been through." The sincerity in his voice made Katherine's throat tighten with emotion. "And if I take this position, what then? We'll be working on the same ranch, seeing each other daily." "Then we'll get to know each other better," Clay said simply. "No expectations, no pressure, just 2 people finding their way." It was a risk. Katherine knew that. But standing there in the sunlit room, with the mountains visible through the window and Clay's steady presence beside her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. "I'll need to return to Twin Pines to collect my things from the hotel," she said. Clay's face broke into a smile that warmed her to her core. "Does that mean you'll take the position?" Katherine nodded, a smile of her own forming. "Yes, I believe I will." When Reynolds returned, Katherine informed him of her decision. The older man seemed pleased, if not effusive, and they quickly agreed on terms. Katherine would begin immediately, staying the night and returning to Twin Pines with Clay the next day to collect her belongings. That evening, after a simple but hearty meal prepared by Maria, Katherine stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The air was cool and fresh, scented with pine and sage, so different from the close confines of the town. The sound of boots on the wooden porch announced Clay's presence before he spoke. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Katherine nodded, not turning from the view. "I never imagined I'd end up here." Clay moved to stand beside her, a respectful distance between them. "Life rarely takes the paths we expect." "No," Katherine agreed softly. "It doesn't." They stood in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, brilliant and countless in the clear mountain air. Katherine felt a peace settling over her, a sense that perhaps this unexpected turn in her journey was exactly where she was meant to be. The weeks that followed were busy ones for Katherine. True to her word, she threw herself into the task of bringing order to the Reynolds household. She scrubbed and polished, washed curtains and linens, reorganized the kitchen with Maria's bemused cooperation, and gradually transformed the neglected house into a home again. Reynolds, for his part, seemed both surprised and pleased by the changes. He was a man of few words, but his appreciation showed in small ways: fresh wildflowers appearing on the porch for her to arrange, a new set of linens ordered from Denver, a word of thanks at the end of a particularly long day. Katherine saw Clay daily, though their interactions were limited by their respective duties. He was often out on the range with the other hands, returning tired and dusty in the evenings. But he always made time to check on her, to ask about her day, to share a cup of coffee on the porch as the sun set. Gradually, a routine developed. Katherine would rise early, helping Maria prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The men would eat in the bunkhouse, but Reynolds, and often Clay in his capacity as the new foreman, would take their morning meal in the main house. These quiet breakfasts became a time for planning the day's work, both for the ranch and the household. After breakfast, Katherine would turn to her domestic duties while the men went about the business of the ranch. Sometimes, if her tasks allowed, she would ride out to deliver lunch to the hands working far afield, savoring the opportunity to be outdoors and to see more of the vast property. Evenings were for rest and reflection. Katherine had discovered a small library in the house, largely untouched since Alina Reynolds' death. With Reynolds' permission, she began cataloging the books and occasionally borrowing one to read in the evenings. Sometimes Clay would join her on the porch or in the sitting room, and they would talk of books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had held. It was during one such evening, nearly a month after Katherine's arrival at the Double R, that Clay first spoke of his hopes for the future. "I've been saving," he said, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "All these years of drifting, working ranch to ranch, haven't had much to spend it on." Katherine looked up from her mending. "Saving for what?" "A place of my own," Clay replied, his voice soft with longing. "Nothing grand like the Double R, just a small spread, enough land for some cattle, a decent house." "That sounds like a fine dream," Katherine said, finding herself oddly moved by this glimpse into his aspirations. Clay's eyes met hers across the room. "It used to be just a dream. Lately, it started to feel like something more." Katherine felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the implication in his words. In the weeks they had known each other, their friendship had deepened, but neither had spoken of anything more. Katherine had been grateful for Clay's patient understanding, his willingness to give her the space she needed to heal from her failed marriage. But now, watching him in the firelight, she acknowledged to herself that her feelings for him had grown beyond simple gratitude or friendship. There was a warmth that spread through her whenever he was near, a lightness in her spirit that had been absent for too long. "Clay," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. He shook his head gently. "You don't need to say anything, Katherine. I'm not rushing you. I just wanted you to know that my wandering days might be coming to an end." The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but something had changed between them. A door opened that could not be closed again. The following day, Katherine was busy with household accounts when a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. From her position at the desk by the window, she could see it was one of the younger hands, riding hard enough to raise concern. Reynolds and Clay were out checking the northern pastures, so Katherine went to the porch to meet the rider. The young man, barely more than a boy, reined in his lathered horse sharply. "Mrs. Miller," he gasped, "is the boss here? Or Mr. Reed?" "They are out checking the herd," Katherine replied. "What's happened?" "Rustlers," the boy said, his face flushed with exertion and excitement. "Down by the South Creek. Pete and I spotted them moving about 20 head toward the border. Pete stayed to keep an eye on them while I rode for help." Katherine's mind raced. Cattle rustling was a serious matter, and with Reynolds and Clay away, decisions needed to be made quickly. "How many men?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "4 that we saw," the boy replied. "Armed," Katherine nodded, making her decision. "Ride to the north pasture. Find Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Reed. Tell them what you've told me. Then round up any hands you can find. I'll send Maria's boy to town for the sheriff." The young rider nodded and wheeled his horse, galloping off in the direction of the northern pastures. Katherine hurried to the kitchen, where Maria was preparing the midday meal. "We need to send for the sheriff," Katherine explained quickly. "Rustlers on the south property. Can your son ride to town?" Maria nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miguel ven aquí rapido." Her 17-year-old son appeared from the back room, and Maria quickly explained the situation in rapid Spanish. The boy nodded, his expression serious, and hurried out to saddle a horse. With the messengers dispatched, Katherine returned to the porch, anxiety knotting her stomach. Cattle rustling often led to violence, and the thought of Clay riding into danger made her heart clench with fear. An hour passed with excruciating slowness. Katherine paced the porch, straining her eyes for any sign of riders returning. When they finally appeared, Reynolds, Clay, and 6 other hands riding hard toward the house, she nearly sagged with relief. The men didn't stop at the house, merely changing to fresh horses before heading south, armed and grim-faced. Clay broke away from the group long enough to speak to Katherine. "Sheriff should be on his way," he said, checking his rifle. "We'll try to head them off before they reach the border. Stay in the house, Katherine." "Be careful," she said, unable to hide the concern in her voice. Clay's expression softened momentarily. "Always am." Then he was gone, spurring his fresh mount after the others. The wait that followed was the longest of Katherine's life. She tried to occupy herself with household tasks, but her mind kept returning to the potential dangers Clay and the others were facing. Rustlers were desperate men, and they wouldn't surrender their prize without a fight. It was nearly dark when they heard the riders returning. Katherine rushed to the porch, her heart in her throat as she counted the approaching figures in the fading light. 8 had left. 8 were returning. The relief nearly buckled her knees. As they drew closer, she could see that one man was slumped in his saddle, supported by a rider on either side. Her heart lurched until she recognized Reynolds' white hair. The injured man wasn't Clay. The men dismounted in the yard, carefully helping Reynolds down from his horse. Clay looked up and saw Katherine on the porch. "He's been shot," Clay called. "In the shoulder. Not too serious, but we need to get him inside." Katherine sprang into action, directing the men to bring Reynolds to his bedroom. She sent one of the hands to fetch the doctor from town while she and Maria prepared hot water, bandages, and the medical supplies kept in the house. The bullet had passed clean through Reynolds' shoulder, missing any vital areas. By the time the doctor arrived, Katherine and Maria had cleaned the wound and applied pressure to stop the bleeding. The doctor commended their quick action, stitched the wound, and left instructions for care before departing. It was well past midnight when Katherine finally stepped out onto the porch, exhausted but unable to sleep. The night was clear, the stars brilliant overhead and the air cool against her flushed skin. She wasn't surprised when Clay joined her a few minutes later, his footsteps familiar now on the wooden boards. He looked tired, with dust from the long ride still clinging to his clothes, but unharmed. "How is he?" Clay asked, leaning against the porch railing. "Resting," Katherine replied. "The doctor says he'll recover fully with proper care. What happened out there?" Clay sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "We caught up to them near the border. The sheriff and his deputies were coming from the other direction. The rustlers were trapped, but they didn't surrender easy. There was shooting. Reynolds took a bullet meant for one of the younger hands. And the rustlers, 2 dead, 2 captured," Clay said grimly. "And we recovered all the cattle." Katherine nodded, relief washing through her. "Thank God you're safe." The words slipped out before she could consider them, revealing more of her feelings than she had intended. Clay turned to look at her, his blue eyes searching her face in the dim light from the windows. "Were you worried about me?" he asked softly. Katherine met his gaze steadily. "Yes." It was a simple admission, but it changed everything between them. Clay moved closer slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't, he reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "Katherine," he murmured, her name a question and a promise all at once. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "I thought I might lose you today, before I ever had the chance to." Clay's other hand came up to frame her face. "To what?" Instead of answering with words, Katherine closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that answered all the unspoken questions between them. Clay's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, both breathless, Clay rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day we met," he admitted. Katherine smiled, a happiness she had thought lost to her forever blooming in her chest. "I'm glad you waited until I was ready." They stood together in the starlight, the vast Colorado sky stretching endlessly above them, and Katherine knew with certainty that her journey had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. With Reynolds recovering from his injury, Clay took on more responsibility at the ranch, proving himself an exceptional foreman. Katherine continued to transform the house, bringing light and life back to rooms that had been shrouded in neglect. Their relationship deepened gradually, naturally. Clay was patient, never pushing for more than Katherine was ready to give. They would ride together on her days off, exploring the far reaches of the ranch. Sometimes they would pack a simple picnic and spend hours by a mountain stream, talking of their pasts, their hopes, their dreams for the future. It was during one such outing, as summer gave way to the golden beauty of a Colorado autumn, that Clay first spoke of marriage. They were seated on a blanket beneath an aspen grove. the leaves shimmering gold in the September sunlight. Katherine was sketching the view, a hobby she had recently rediscovered, while Clay leaned against a tree trunk, watching her with undisguised admiration. "You have a real talent," he said as she captured the sweep of the mountains on her paper. Katherine smiled, pleased by his praise. "My father encouraged it when I was young. He said I had an eye for beauty." "He was right," Clay agreed. "Just as you have a way of bringing beauty to everything you touch." Katherine set down her pencil, touched by his words. "The beauty was always there. I just helped uncover it." Clay moved to sit beside her on the blanket, taking her hand in his. "Katherine, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened at the seriousness in his tone. "Yes. I know it hasn't been that long since your marriage ended," Clay began, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "And I understand if you need more time. But I want you to know that I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day on the stagecoach." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. Though they had grown increasingly close, neither had spoken the word love until now. "I love you too," she said softly, the words bringing a sense of rightness, of completion. Clay's face lit with joy at her admission. "Then would you consider becoming my wife?" The question hung in the air between them, momentous, yet somehow inevitable. Katherine's mind flashed back to her first marriage, the expectations, the disappointments, the crushing sense of failure. "Clay," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you first, something important." He squeezed her hand encouragingly. "You can tell me anything." Katherine took a deep breath. "The reason my marriage to Harold ended, it wasn't just that we grew apart. It was because I couldn't give him children, sons specifically." The admission still hurt, still carried the sting of shame that had been drilled into her. "The doctors say I may never be able to bear children." She held her breath, waiting for his reaction, for the disappointment that had become so familiar in Harold's eyes. Instead, Clay lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Katherine, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, surprised to find no disappointment, only tenderness. "I'm not asking you to be my wife because I want sons," Clay said firmly. "I'm asking because I love you, because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Because I want to build a life with you, whether that includes children or not." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "But every man wants sons, to carry on his name, to work alongside him." Clay shook his head. "What I want is you. You're enough for me, Katherine, more than enough." The words, so simple, yet so profound, broke something open inside Katherine. Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of shame and inadequacy began to dissolve in the face of Clay's unconditional love. "You mean that?" she whispered, not a question but a realization. "With all my heart," Clay affirmed. "So, Katherine Miller, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, whatever that life may bring?" Katherine's answer was in her kiss, fierce and full of promise. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, she gave him the words as well. "Yes, Clay Reed, I will marry you." They were married in late October, when the aspens had turned to gold and the first dusting of snow had whitened the distant peaks. The ceremony was small, held in the Twin Pines Church, with Reynolds fully recovered from his wound giving Katherine away. The townspeople Katherine had met during her brief stay turned out for the occasion, along with the ranch hands and a few of Clay's friends from his travels. Reynolds gifted them a piece of land at the eastern edge of his property, 100 acres with a small creek running through it and a view of the mountains. "Been holding on to it for years," the older man explained gruffly. "Thought it might make a good place for a family someday." With the help of the ranch hands and craftsmen from town, Clay built their house through the winter months. It was modest compared to the main ranch house, but solid and well designed, with large windows to capture the mountain views that Katherine loved to sketch. By spring, they were settled in their new home. Clay continued his work as foreman at the Double R, while Katherine divided her time between their household and helping at the main house, where Reynolds had insisted he still needed her touch. It was a good life, filled with hard work but also with joy, with the deep contentment that comes from being truly known and loved. Katherine's sketches of the ranch, the mountains, the changing seasons began to attract attention when she displayed a few at the general store in Twin Pines. Soon, she was receiving commissions from townspeople and visitors alike, adding a small but satisfying income to their household. They had been married nearly a year when Katherine experienced the first bout of morning sickness. At first, she dismissed it as a stomach upset, unwilling to hope for what she had been told was impossible. But as the symptoms persisted, she finally confided in Maria, whose knowing smile sent a thrill of both terror and joy through Katherine's heart. The doctor in Twin Pines confirmed what Katherine had scarcely dared to believe. She was with child, due in the early spring. When she told Clay that evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for: pure joy, mingled with concern for her well-being. But the doctors in Redemption Creek said. Katherine began, still unable to fully trust this miracle. Clay gathered her in his arms, his hand gently resting on her still flat stomach. Doctors can be wrong, and maybe. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe it wasn't just about you, Katherine. Maybe Harold was the problem, not you. The possibility had never occurred to Katherine. In Redemption Creek, as in most places, barrenness was always assumed to be the woman's failure. But Clay's suggestion made sense. Harold's family had always boasted of the Miller men's fertility, yet in 5 years of marriage, Katherine had never conceived. Whether this child is a boy or a girl, Clay said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, it will be loved. Just as you are loved, Katherine raved. You were always enough for me, just as you are. This baby is a blessing, but you were already my greatest gift. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Katherine couldn't help but worry. Clay insisted she rest more, taking on additional household duties himself, and even hiring a young girl from town to help with the heavier work. Reynolds, upon hearing the news, became unexpectedly protective, treating Katherine as if she were made of porcelain whenever she visited the main house. As her body changed, Katherine found a new subject for her sketches: the subtle transformations of pregnancy, the growing curve of her stomach, the changes in her face and form. She kept a visual journal of these months, a testament to the miracle she was experiencing. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and quiet days by the fire. Katherine sewed baby clothes and planned for the nursery, while Clay added a rocking chair to their bedroom and carved a cradle from pine wood, his hands creating with the same care and precision he brought to everything he did. The first pains began on a clear March morning as dawn broke over the mountains. Clay rode for the midwife in Twin Pines while Maria came to stay with Katherine. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as the sun set behind the mountains, Katherine gave birth to a daughter small but perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would later reveal themselves to be as blue as her father's. When Clay was finally allowed into the bedroom, his face reflected a mixture of awe, love, and overwhelming gratitude. He knelt beside the bed where Katherine lay cradling their daughter, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "She's beautiful," he whispered, gently touching the infant's tiny hand. "Just like her mother." Katherine watched as her daughter's fingers curled reflexively around Clay's calloused index finger, the contrast between his large hand and the baby's tiny one making her heart swell with love. "What shall we call her?" Clay asked, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. Katherine had been considering names throughout her pregnancy, but in this moment only one seemed right. Hope, she said softly. Her name is Hope. Clay looked up, understanding and approval in his eyes. Hope Reed. It's perfect. As twilight deepened outside their window, the small family remained in their peaceful cocoon. Katherine thought of how far she had come from the shame and rejection she had experienced in Redemption Creek, to this moment of pure joy and fulfillment. I never thought I could be this happy, she admitted, leaning into Clay's embrace as they marveled at their daughter. You deserve every happiness, Clay replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Both of you do. Hope grew into a strong, curious child, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's artistic temperament. By the time she was 2, Katherine was pregnant again, another miracle that the doctors in Redemption Creek had claimed would never happen. Their second child, a son they named Daniel, arrived in the summer, completing their family in a way Katherine had once believed impossible. Clay doted on both children equally, taking as much pride in Hope's budding artistic talents as in Daniel's early attempts to ride a pony. 5 years after Katherine had stepped off that stagecoach in Twin Pines, she stood on the porch of their home, watching Clay teach Hope to ride in the meadow while Daniel napped inside. The Double R Ranch spread out before her, the mountains rising majestically in the distance, and the life she had built with Clay surrounding her like an embrace. She thought of Harold Miller and his mother, of the narrow definition of worth that had nearly broken her spirit. She thought of the road that had led her here, of the chance meeting with a kind-eyed cowboy who had seen her value when she herself had forgotten it. Clay looked up from the meadow, catching her eye across the distance. Even now, after years together, his smile still warmed her to her core. He lifted Hope onto the saddle in front of him, and they rode toward the house, the little girl's laughter carrying on the mountain breeze. As they drew closer, Katherine could hear Hope chattering excitedly about her ride and Clay's patient responses. This was the legacy that mattered. Katherine realized not just children to carry on a name, but love freely given, acceptance without conditions, joy shared in both triumph and adversity. Clay dismounted, lifting Hope down before tying the horse to the hitching post. The little girl ran to Katherine, her face alight with excitement. "Mama, Papa let me hold the reins all by myself." Katherine knelt to embrace her daughter. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You're becoming quite the horsewoman." Clay joined them on the porch, wrapping an arm around Katherine's waist as Hope raced inside to check on her baby brother. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Katherine leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for the man who had shown her that her worth was never tied to her ability to bear sons, but to the love she carried in her heart. "Completely," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "You were right, you know." "About what?" Clay asked, his arms tightening around her. Katherine smiled up at him, her heart full. "Sometimes the road between from and toward really is the most important part of the journey." Clay's answering smile was as warm as the Colorado sun. "And our journey is just beginning, Katherine Reed." "Just beginning,"